Automakers are promising that they are going to be offering more affordable models in the future, and I don't really think this is going to be a great idea, at least not the way they're planning on doing it. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. If you're new here, my name is John, and I can say this video is broken down into bad news, good news, and bad news. The bad news is that prices have been going up. In December, according to Kelley Blue Book, we hit $49,700 and I believe $40 as the average transaction price, and the average payment was over about $750. This is nearing the peak of where it was back in 2022. So we actually have been seeing a decrease in the average transaction price, but it's been edging back up. Now, December tends to be a strong month for luxury brands, and so January, I think we're seeing a little bit of a decrease there. But because of the way averages work, if you've got a $25,000 Chevy Trax that sells, to get to that average, that means you sold a $75,000 or $80,000 Chevy Silverado in the process. And that's not totally sustainable. Lots of people talk about how nobody can afford cars anymore, and that's not true. Sales are actually quite high and expected to increase next year too, here in 2025, with possibly an increase in rebates as well. For 2024, rebates held pretty steady overall. But an interesting tidbit out of the research for this video came that the percentage of buyers of new cars, new vehicles, under 35 decreased to 17.6%. That sounds not terrible, except that's 3% lower. They're being priced out of the market. And automakers, they know this is happening, and they want to address it. And automakers are doing it in a couple of different ways. Now, some manufacturers like General Motors have come out with less expensive vehicles. If you look at Buick, the Encore GX and the Envista, both were the top sellers for Buick last year, and those are the least expensive models they have. Over at Chevy, you've got the Trailblazer. The Trax has been a hit and is now the third best-selling vehicle over at Chevrolet. So they actually addressed it by coming out with a less expensive vehicle. The same thing happened years ago with Ford when they came out with the Maverick, but they've been pushing its price up, where the starting price is now $26,000, $27,000 with that hybrid engine. So most manufacturers are trying to address this by coming out with less contented versions of the vehicles they already have. So the good news is they're coming out with cheaper vehicles, but they're just the same stuff we've already seen before, just decontented. Consider that Mitsubishi wants to come out with a less expensive version of their best-selling vehicle. Volkswagen's already done this with the Tiguan. They came out with the Wolfsburg edition, which has become a strong seller for them. Other manufacturers like Ford are being rather aggressive about it. They've announced they're coming out with a base level, or coming back with a base level of the Broncos. The Maverick was just redesigned. They're going to come out with the STX trim again of the F150, which will be something like 40% of the price of a Platinum. Still sounds pretty expensive, but at least they're coming out with a less expensive version. Of course, over at Stellantis, they came out with the Voyager, a less expensive version of the same minivan they keep throwing out there to us. And Ram is really interesting because they got rid of the 1500 Classic, which was their most affordable truck, but then they're going to change the 1500 to make a less expensive version of it. So manufacturers are coming forth to lower the price of their cars, make them more affordable, but they're doing it by decontenting it. I'd like to highlight a couple things here because, number one, over at Ford, part of their presentation, and all this information came from dealers' presentations at the National Automobile Dealers Association conference they just had down in New Orleans, if I remember. And all these manufacturers started talking, including Toyota, talking to their dealers that they're going to come out with more affordable models. One of the ones Ford proposed is an electric midsize truck. Well, with mid-sized trucks being as expensive as they are, which is about the average, if we're honest with each other, and EVs tending to be a little bit more expensive, not sure that's exactly the market they're going for. That's the message they needed to send. But let's also consider Tesla. If we're talking about EVs for a minute, they are a strong seller in America. They promised the Model 2. They promised it for years, and finally they said, we're not going to do it. But sales have been a little tougher for them recently, and so they're talking about coming out with less expensive versions of the Model 3 and the Model Y. Not new vehicles here, just less expensive versions. And so that leads us to the bad news, the final bad news, which is we're going to see a lot more of the same stuff that we already see. It's going to be more crossovers. It's going to be more trucks. And I appreciate that they're getting the price down. I really like the Trax, and the Buick Envista has been very well received, not overpowered per se. And we all wonder what that Korean-built vehicle is going to do in terms of reliability. But most reviews that you read, and if you touch it and feel it and drive it, it feels like a really good deal for the price. That's the right way to do it, even though it's yet another crossover or tall station wagon. What manufacturers aren't doing is investing in less expensive cars. We're losing the Versa, we're losing the Mitsubishi Mirage. Nobody's moving down market. Nobody is offering less expensive cars that are built up to the price. What they're doing is they're taking their existing stuff and offering cheaper versions of it. And cheaper is cheap. So we all should celebrate that at least manufacturers are finally listening, especially over at Stellantis. They're finally listening to their dealers to get less expensive stuff out there. And there's news around Jeep as well. But they're not doing it by building up to a point. They're not aiming for that sub $20,000 car that's excellent. What the Japanese were great at for so many decades. It sounds like they're just decontenting stuff to get the price down, or more specifically, to get those younger buyers in the door. Let me know what you think below, guys. I appreciate you being here.